Welcome once again to our study of the way of the Bodhisattva with the commentary by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Bodhisattva Guide. And as always, kindly reflect how this study is intending to be the foundation for our path. And our path is dedicated, on the basis of what we're hearing here, is dedicated to penetrating to the insight that frees us from the suffering that afflicts everyone, everywhere. And in this way, the theory that we're studying here, and also the practice that's associated, which is the application of this theory, is something that's relevant for everyone, everywhere. We use language, but at the same time, what we're presenting here goes beyond language, goes beyond culture, goes beyond any kind of limitation. It goes right to the heart of what really touches all sentient beings, which is the goodness that's innate to every sentient being, and yet which is obscured. And that's where Shantideva, the Buddha, our teachers, the sages, and so on, have only one agenda, and that is to free us from this confusion that brings us into this situation. And this is where the Buddha kindly teaches. The Buddha can't wave a magic wand, but the Buddha and the sages, they can teach us, they can show how this is done. So this is on the basis of the teachings we have here, and also on the basis of a living tradition. This is not just theory, but for 2,500 years, and try and think about it. Try and think about what that actually means in terms of individuals who have confirmed the insight of the Buddha time after time. Men and women who time after time have gained this insight, and you could say validated what it is the Buddha says, validated what it is Shantideva says. We're not just onto some sort of great little do-it-yourself project, or like we have in the modern world, a very confused understanding of the human disposition, profoundly focusing on the material, and with a very limited understanding really of the human mind. And that's where we, as much as this opens up for dimensions which are different and provocative, we should maintain an open mind about the insights that are gained here. And so often it is that we sort of go, what? And it's almost really good when we sort of are a bit sort of puzzled by what is being said, because hopefully we then think about it and it stays with us, and it's there where we gain insight and clarity and go beyond the hesitations. But it's very important that we give the benefit of the doubt to the subject matter here, really in view of seeing how for how many millennia, well, let's see, for how many centuries, for 2.5 millennia, that this really has been validated by countless men and women across cultures in which there really was an awareness around the central role of the mind. So, so in this way, sort of having an appreciation for the vastness of the scope of what we're studying here, then we shall continue with the present topic, which is then the study of patience, which is which is something that's always wonderfully relevant, at least if you're like me, who regularly is sort of runs into things that require patience. Then certainly this topic is something that's forever fresh and relevant. Before we begin, then we'll just do some opening chants, quote from the Vinaya and from the Prajnaparamita, and then the taking a refuge in developing the enlightened motivation. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud. So should one consider all compounded things. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. So, veneration, praise, and fame serve not to increase merit or my span of life, bestowing neither health nor strength, and nothing for the body's ease. So this is something that we love. We love veneration, we love praise, we love being fame in the sense of having a good reputation. And this is where we're challenging this assumption. This is the beauty of Shantideva. There's never a dull moment in the company of Shantideva. And this that we make such a big deal out of, he actually has a few things to say about that, which he has then said here, and His Holiness then comments. Simply being praised is of no substantial help at all. It does not increase people's good fortune, nor does it make them live any longer. If temporary pleasure is all you want, you might as well take drugs. Yet many people invest much money and even deceive their friends so as to win status. This is quite stupid. Their status and fame do not really help much in this life and do nothing for future lives. There is no point in being happy if we're famous or unhappy because people speak ill of us. So this is something that we notice how our mind is lifted when we get veneration and praise, and yet we can also see how this contributes to the very core of the cause of our suffering, which is the sense of I. There's a sense of me. Try and notice if after being praised we then are criticized, how we get offended. And so that's where we can see that the praise that we get doesn't really help us. It really just increases our sense of self. And just in terms of just on the terms of our self-interest and self-centering itself, we have to acknowledge it doesn't necessarily make us live longer or in any way sort of contribute in any way. So that's where there's an element of ignorance taking place. We're deluded if we think this is such a big deal. And that's where also you can see the sage. You know, the sage is not somebody that gets excited. The Dalai Lama doesn't get excited when he sits in front of 5,000 people and is adored by all these people. Well, there might be a few people who are disgruntled about the Dalai Lama for one reason or another. But in general, he receives a lot of accolades. And he really, what is the reason why we would regard someone like the Dalai Lama as worthy of our respect and veneration is for the very reason that we can safely assume, at least I do, that he actually doesn't care about that. And he would be indifferent to being criticized. And that's where the Buddha's our object of refuge. Not as somebody who's just an incredibly heroic person, but as somebody who has actually gone beyond this thing that really lies at the core of our suffering, namely this self-fixation. And that's where we have to acknowledge this, the self-fixation being confirmed, our ego being sort of stroked in the right way and so on, does not at all help us. So that's where the bottom line here is there's no point in being happy if we're famous or unhappy because people speak ill of us. Shantideva says, children can't help crying when their sandcastles come crumbling down. My mind is so like them when praise and reputation start to fail. Short-lived, sound, devoid of intellect. can never in itself intend to praise me. I say that it's the joy that others take in me. It's this that is the cause of my delight. But what is it to me if others take delight in someone else, or even in myself? Their pleasure is theirs, and theirs alone. No part of it is felt by me. So we know how children, they are upset about their castles because they're attached to these sandcastles. And that's something that when we're older, we can see this is okay. It's not really that big a deal. But there's been this, you could say, projection onto the sandcastle on the part of the child. So we can perfectly well understand the child. It's never as if a sane parent will start scolding their child for crying when their sandcastles come crumbling down. A parent's heart goes out to the children, but at the same time also there's the awareness that these sandcastles are not such a big deal. And so we're so similar when we're, particularly if we're sort of used to or expecting or wanting some recognition or praise or, sweet renown, etc., and it doesn't happen. That's where our expectations aren't met. And then we're exactly like that. We make a big deal out of the sandcastle of our reputation, and then it's crumbling. It's not happening. The sound itself, when somebody says, gosh, you're a wonderful person, that sound itself has no intention. These are just the words. And that's where we have this saying also in English where about, sticks and stones, etc. That's where the words themselves have no intention in and of themselves. It's just that we interpret it, and we might say there's somebody else behind it, and then we can say, well, isn't it nice that I'm giving somebody else that kind of joy? But are we fooling ourselves? Is it really that joy in others is what makes us happy? Because then we should just be happy whenever they are happy. Whenever, if they if they stole our car and they're happy with that, well, we should be happy for them too, right? So let's not pretend that there's not a self behind this. And that's where we need to acknowledge that it is really about us. It is really about our egoic, self-centered sort of need for praise. And so we shouldn't try to rationalize it. And that's also where we have this, this pleasure that others have. If they really were to have genuine delight in someone else, or even if it is in me, that delight is entirely theirs. So actually, that's again nothing that is felt by myself. I remember my father, he used to say, we occasionally would have the sort of mind matter discussion, what happens when we pass on. And my dad was a Lutheran, he was a Protestant, which basically in Denmark means that you just don't really think about it too much, except show up for Christmas and sort of Easter maybe, and the marriages, funerals, etc. But you actually don't really think about the deeper issues. And even if you do, it's not really a nice dinner conversation. It's just not really a big part of Danish culture, passionate discussion about these things. This might have changed, but anyway. So that's where there's just sort of very often some glib sort of cliches that apply. And so my dad would say, well, when we pass away, we live on in the ways people speak of us. We live on in other people's minds, which is it's very difficult to sort of say, okay, but yeah, but what does that do for you? Where's the mind actually gone? Of course, I never really went there with my father, just because I knew it was pointless. But we can see this sort of idea that, that there is something of us that's living in others. It's the same with the pleasure, let's be sort of honest and just say, well, that's entirely their problem, if you like. If they're happy or they're not happy with us, it's actually not felt by us. So His Holiness here says, nice words of praise are devoid of mind. They have no wish to say good things about us. The good intentions other people have of praising us are their good intentions, not ours. If we're happy because others have pleasant things to say about us, then we should also be happy when they say the same about our enemies. We should treat everybody equally. So this is what we should do. Here's the prescription, namely, we should just treat everybody equally. And that is what the sage does. That is what that's characterizes a sage. And that is not behaving like a sage, but why we praise a sage and regard a sage as refuge is not from what they say or do. It's from that they actually are indifferent. So actually, regardless of whatever they might say, if they truly are indifferent, if they're truly not, if they're in an awake condition, not just being numb or indifferent, dull, but actually in a joyous, awake condition, they have no preference whether they are being praised or their enemies are being praised. So that's where there's this great equanimity, which is provocative and really interesting for us. And that is also why we take refuge in the Buddha, why we practice the path, and so on. So Shantideva says, praise and compliments distract me, sapping my revulsion with samsara. I start to envy others their good qualities, and thus all excellence is ruined. So that's where we can see where vanity actually gets in the way. We're actually, like Padampa Sanja says, humans can take a lot of suffering, but very little happiness. And it's interesting, when we're criticized, when we are subjected to difficult situations, our mind turns to the Dharma. Actually, Paul Rinpoche also says, I want to suffer. I don't want to be happy. When I suffer, when my mind turns to the Dharma. When I'm happy, I'm absorbed by the kleshas. So the praise and compliments, all they do is really, well, if we're ordinary persons, they distract us. They sort of all of a sudden we feel good about what is in fact completely and entirely superficial. And then we're caught up in this thing of comparing ourselves with others. And that's where we're ruined. His Holiness says, praise, if you think about it, is actually a distraction. For example, in the beginning, one may be a simple, humble monk, content with little. Later on, people may say flattering things like, he's a Lama, and one begins to feel a bit more proud and to become self-conscious about how one looks and behaves. Then the 8 worldly preoccupations, meaning basically hope and fear, become stronger, do they not? Praise is a distraction and destroys renunciation. So, as above. Again, at first, when we have little, we do not have much reason for a sense of competition with others. But later, when the humble monk starts to grow some hair, as it's said, apparently, he becomes conceited. And as he becomes more influential, he vies with others for important positions. We feel jealous of anyone who has good qualities, and this, in the end, destroys whatever good qualities we ourselves have. Being praised is not really a good thing, and it can be the source of negative actions. So this is also something that's a dominant theme within Western arts and literature and so on. It's how somebody who is pure, innocent, and on the basis of their success then is corrupted. And that's where even a monk that might be just, simply doing the practicing and so on, then all of a sudden being acknowledged, all of a sudden beginning to then, you could say this acknowledgement becomes the source of a sense of I am special. Then there's the ambition, the vanity, the competition, and so on. And at the end, then the person is ruined. So this is something that we're universally familiar with. Then Shantideva says, those who stay close by me then to damage my good name and cut me down to size are surely there protecting me from falling into realms of grief. So that's where the opposite is, those who stay by me and really annoy us. They're actually really helping us, as per stanza 47 we looked at last time. They're the ones who actually enable us to purify our karma. They enable us to progress on the path. And at the same time, they actually, through their possible negative actions then thrown into painful experiences. And that's where they then really should be the object of our compassion. So somebody who actually is annoying is somebody who actually both helps us on the path to enlightenment and also to someone to whom we thus have gratitude, and also someone that should be the object of our compassion. So that's what we went through in some great length there. But similarly also then it applies then when there are somebody, and those who stay close to us, who we get to see all the time, who really sort of might damage our good name, cut us down, and all of that, they're actually really a blessing. There's this famous story, most of you would have heard many times. Atisha, going to Tibet, heard the Tibetans were very nice people and delightful company and all of that. So he got a bit worried that he might not be able to practice his patience. Of course, the Tibetans say when he eventually got to Tibet, he found out there was plenty of opportunity to practice patience, but that's sort of a Tibetan addition to that story. But he did then purposely, he brought along an obnoxious person, his Bengali tea boy. There was a boy that used to make tea for Atisha, and he was completely obnoxious and irritating. And Atisha kept him around because he was really, really good for his practice. So that's where he then brought this tea boy to Tibet. And we talk about the proverbial Bengali tea boy as someone who stays close to us and is someone who enables us to practice patience, teacher of patience. So that's why His Holiness says, as our real goal is enlightenment, we should not be angry with our enemies, who in fact dispel all the obstacles to our attaining enlightenment. They, referring to the enemies, they like Buddha's blessing, but like Buddha's very blessing, bar my way, determined as I am to plunge myself headlong into sorrow. How can I be angry with them? I should not be irritating by saying, they are obstacles to my good deeds. For is not patience the supreme austerity? And should I not abide by this? This is so good. So that's where we say we're actually indebted to these people, because there we are, left to our own devices, which is then essentially following the ambitions of our ego. Then we would be heading straight into the causes of heading straight into sorrowful experiences, existences. And yet there we have someone who actually purifies our karma, helps us on the path, and someone to whom we should be deeply indebted. So how could we be angry at them? So that's where these persons that deeply annoy us, they are persons that prevent us from pain and sorrow. And so that's where Shantideva says, I should not be irritating by saying they are obstacles to my good deed, because in fact they are the ones that teach us patience. So who could do this? For example, if we stayed with the Dalai Lama, or we stayed with our guru, well, presumably our guru, the Dalai Lama, are wonderful people. So that's where we would actually not have it. We would in this sense of, oh, I'm with a wonderful person, and just having that sort of contact high, that sort of sense of just being in the right place with the right person and all of that, which is can be good in some way. But at the same time, we actually don't really get the opportunity to practice patience. In fact, what very often happens, especially around sublime persons, is that the followers will see the sublime person as very special, like a god, and will see those around, the ordinary persons who don't have these qualities, as sort of irritants and minions and sort of inferior persons. And that's where we then we end up seeing the teacher as the god, and we end up seeing the sangha as demons. And that's a very sad situation. So that's where when we're around great teachers, one thing they can't do really is teach us patience, whereas our enemies these annoying persons that, and we know who they are. We know where it is our emotions sort of, you know, the thermometer rises. You know, we're hopefully not that, how do you say, alienated to our own psychology, that we don't know what we're experiencing. We presumably are. And we would know when this irritation mounts, when this anger mounts. And that's where we would just say, now this is happening. I'm so indebted to these persons that are creating this, because now I can practice this supreme austerity. So His Holiness says, it's no use excusing ourselves, saying that our enemies are preventing us from practicing. And that is why we get angry. If we truly want to progress, there is no practice more important than patience. We cannot pretend to be practitioners if we have no patience. If we cannot bear the harm our enemies do to us, and instead get angry, we are ourselves the obstacles to achieving an immensely positive action. So it's not the enemies that are the problem, it's ourselves. We are the obstacles, not the one out there. Nothing can exist without a cause, and there can be no practice of patience without there being people who wrong us. How then can we call such people obstacles to our practice of patience, which is fundamental to the Mahayana path? We can hardly call a beggar an obstacle to generosity. Meaning there's a beggar asking us for something, they're giving us the opportunity to practice generosity. There's an annoying person, they're giving us opportunity to practice patience. So there we have two paramitas. There are many reasons for charity. The world is full of people in need. On the other hand, those who make us angry and test our patience are relatively few, especially if we avoid harming others. So when we encounter these rare enemies, we should appreciate them. So patience is extremely important. And we would actually say, as you go along the 6 paramitas, we would say, first we have generosity, but even more important is discipline, even more important is patience. And so that's where the opportunity to practice patience is something that's valued. We should appreciate these annoying or actual enemies. We'll do 2 questions and answers later, but type it in because it's easier for me, because otherwise the others can't hear your question. So like a treasure found at home that I have gained without fatigue, my enemies are helpers in my Bodhisattva work, and therefore they should be a joy to me. So there we are. We find something that we already, without any effort, spontaneously is present. We have it spontaneously without any fatigue. So that's where these enemies, they're like a boon or a gift, a blessing. When we have been patient towards enemies, we should dedicate the fruit of this practice to them, because they are the causes of it. They have been very kind to us. We might ask, why should they deserve this dedication when they had no intention of making us practice patience? But do objects need to have an intention before they're worthy of our respect? The Dharma itself, which points out the cessation of suffering and is the cause of happiness, has no intention of helping us, yet it is surely worthy of respect. So this is an important point. Of course, the Buddha spoke, but again, these were just sounds. It's on the basis of our ability and our merit that we can actually hear the truth of it. Otherwise, these sounds, they're just there. Similarly, the heritage of the teaching, as it exists in scriptures, as it exists in terms of communications and so on, the sounds and the things that actually tick when we hear it, there is no intention in that. And yet we profoundly venerate the teachers, we profoundly venerate the Dharma. So then we we benefit, just like we benefit from the Dharma, we benefit from our enemies. And this is also something, again, we know that. We know that when we're able to be patient with difficult people, the situation flourishes. When we get upset and angry and retaliate, the situation becomes tight and sad. So His Holiness says, we might think then that our enemies are undeserving because they actively wish to harm us. But even if everyone were as kind and well-intentioned as a doctor, how could we ever practice patience? And when a doctor, intending to cure us, hurts us by amputating a limb, cutting us open, or pricking us with needles, we do not think of him or her as an enemy and get angry with them. Thus, we cannot practice patience towards him. But enemies are those who intend to harm us, and it is for this reason that we are able to practice patience towards them. So we do receive a lot of you could say, hurt and discomfort on the basis of well-intended people like doctors or whatever, therapists, or osteopath, or whatever. Then we bear that, but then we don't really practice patience in that regard then. But enemies, we sense their wanting, especially not only those who are sort of just, you could say, stupid and inept and who irritate us, but those who actually truly deeply want to harm us. And luckily, most of us probably don't have that so often, but it happens. But that's where actually, in that nth degree of our being subjected to discomfort on the basis of someone else's actions towards us, that's where we then have this reason and the opportunity to practice patience. Thanks to those whose minds are full of malice, I engender patience in myself. They, therefore, are the causes of my patience, fit for veneration, like the Dharma. And so, the mighty sage has spoken of the field of beings, as well as the field of conquerors. Many who brought happiness to beings have passed beyond, attaining to perfection. So again, this is where we venerate those who cause us to practice patience. It is just as valuable as the Dharma. And likewise also then those who have taught and benefited beings have they've passed away, and yet they have enabled great benefit. So His Holiness says there are two fields through which we can accumulate merit: beings and Buddhas. It is with the aid of beings, wretched though they are, that we can accumulate positive actions, develop bodhicitta, practice the six perfections, and attain the qualities of nirvana. So what's there not to like about sentient beings? And especially those who then, as we have in the previous stanza, those who engender patience in ourselves. Without beings, we cannot have compassion, and without compassion, we cannot achieve supreme enlightenment, but will rather fall into the extreme of nirvana. So if it wasn't for sentient beings, then there wouldn't be this sense of other. And it's on the basis of that compassion for others that we engage in the path. It's that where our dualistic mind begins to actually catch on to the value of the path and begin to actually dissolve the fixating on the self. So His Holiness says, so the attainment of supreme enlightenment and the understanding we gain on the path are dependent on beings just as much as on the Buddhas. So again, this is where we can't discriminate, saying, oh, the Buddhas are so wonderful, the Lama is so wonderful, the Guru is so wonderful, and then there's all these annoying people out there, whether it's Sangha or actually people who we profoundly dislike and so forth. And that's where we need to completely 180-degree shift with regards to them. We need to venerate them as much as the Buddhas. It is a mistake to separate them, saying the Buddhas are superior and beings are inferior, as they are both equally necessary for our attainment of enlightenment. Why do we not respect beings as much as we do Buddhas? So of course, this particularly also falls in line with our very egalitarian, democratic, sort of contemporary trends within modern culture. And for this very reason here, actually, that they are providing, there's no difference between Buddhas and sentient beings, in terms of providing assistance on the path. And again, particularly those who are annoying us. So not in the qualities of their minds, but in the fruits that they give are they alike. In beings too, such excellence resides, and therefore beings and Buddhas are the same. So of course they are not equal in their qualities, but in the sense that beings have the potential to assist us in accumulating merit and gaining enlightenment, we can say that they're equal. So of course we very often say all beings are Buddhas. And that's only partially true, because we say that there's two purities, and there's the purity that beings and Buddhas, they share, which is Buddha nature. Yes, all beings intrinsically are Buddhas, but Buddhas, they have an additional purity, which is that they have eliminated the fleeting condition of confusion. Sentient beings haven't eliminated that, and so they don't have that purity. They have innate purity shared with Buddhas and sentient beings, but the removing of obscurations, that they don't have. So that's where we would say that there's difference in the qualities of Buddhas and sentient beings. But in terms of our journey on the path and the effect, that's where Buddhas and sentient beings are equal. So Shantideva says, the Buddhas are my true, unfailing friends. Boundless are the benefits they bring to me. How else may I repay their goodness but by making living beings happy? Buddhas are made happy by the joy of beings. They sorrow, they lament when beings suffer. By bringing joy to beings, then I please the Buddhas also. By wounding them, I wound the Buddhas too. And again, this is where we need to understand sentient beings, they change all the time. There's this famous anecdote from Words of My Perfect Teacher, from the scriptures. At the time the sage Katyayana was walking the streets, he saw a mother clutching her little child in her lap, at her breast, and at the same time she was eating a fish. And while the child is nursing on her and she's eating the fish, there's a dog that's coming up and trying to sort of go for the fish and sort of growling at the mother, wanting to have the fish, and the mother kicks it away. And Katyayana says, this display of samsara is amazing. And so due to his clairvoyance or his abilities, he could see that and he just exclaimed, wow, the phenomena of the world are incredible, because he could see that the dog that she was kicking away was her lover from a previous life, that the baby in her that she was nursing was the enemy from her previous life, and the fish that she was eating was the rebirth of her parent, one of her parents. So that's where we can say that the role that sentient beings have is completely uncertain, and there might be someone who's very dear to us in this life and others who are very annoying to us, but that's entirely just circumstantial, and these things are continually shifting. So of course we would say that in this regard, present discussion here, as far as the Buddhas being those who bring benefit to us, if we really want to make the Buddhas happy, then we want to make living beings happy. If we want to make an offering to the teacher, make the teacher happy, then it's about treating all beings with respect. So Shantideva is making the point that what Buddhas are made happy when beings are happy, and they empathize when beings are suffering. So us bringing joy to others is bringing joy to the Buddhas. Wounding others, we're wounding the Buddhas too. His Holiness comments, if we really take refuge in the Buddhas, then we should respect their wishes. After all, in ordinary life, it's normal to adapt in some way to one's friends and respect their wishes. The ability to do so is considered a good quality. It is truly sad if, on the one hand, we say that we take refuge with heartfelt devotion in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but on the other hand, in our actions, we contemptuously ignore what displeases them. We are prepared to conform to the standards of ordinary people, but not to those of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So that's where we're willing to conform to what our friends would like, but we are obviously not going to conform to the wishes of the Buddhas. That's where His Holiness says, how miserable. So if, for example, a Christian truly loves God, then he should practice love for all his fellow human beings. Otherwise, he's failing to follow his religion. His words and deeds are in contradiction. And that's where in Christianity, you so often hear how Christ and how God loves all beings. So if we if we are not kind to all these beings, then, or if a Christian isn't kind to the beings, he's not following his religion. His deeds and words are in contradiction. And this, of course, is not to pounce at the Christians, but it is just because so many of us in the modern world, we've been brought up within a Christian context, and we are aware of the Christian teaching. So Shantideva says, this very thing is pleasing to the Buddha's heart and perfectly secures the welfare of myself. This will drive away the sorrows of the world, and therefore it will be my constant work. So this really sums up this point that we're addressing here, that we're onto. It is what will bring pleasure to the Buddha's hearts, and it will also bring the welfare to ourselves. It will eliminate the suffering in the world, and for that reason, this is what we should be dedicated to. There's a term here, the Buddha's hearts. Those who practice Vajrayana sadhana, it's very often that we do amendment practice. And that's very often where we hear this term. Kangwa in Tibetan, and it's translated in so many different ways, but essentially, may it please the heart promise, as for example, if we're making the amendment practice in the lineage of the great perfection, we often say, may this amend the heart promise or the heart wishes of Garab Dorje, of Manjushri Mitra, of Sri Singha, and so on. And that's essentially meaning abiding by the practice. If we fail to do that, then we do amendment practice with the wish to actually arrive at the place where we fulfill the wishes of these lineage teachers. In this case here, we're talking about the Buddha, but it is by abiding at along with the wish of the Buddha, of the masters of the lineage, that we then please them. And it's so that's where we mean, may this please the mind of Sri Singha or whatever. So and also actually we have it in Western mysticism with Meister Eckhart also, who speaks about the joy of abiding by the will of God, which is really similar to what we talk about as samaya in the Buddhist teaching. Anyway, that is then, with all the value of this is then what we focus on. This therefore is my constant work. And so His Holiness comments, the ambassadors of a king or president, for example, have to be respected, however unimpressive they may look, because they represent a whole country. Similarly, all beings, wretched as they may be, are under the protection of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So by directly harming beings, we indirectly pain the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is something we should be very careful about. If we can please beings, it goes without saying that this will contribute toward our attaining omniscience. Even in this life, we will be happy and relaxed, well thought of, and have many friends. In future lives, we will be good looking, strong and healthy, and we will be reborn in the higher realms with the 8 qualities that are the result of positive actions. Under such favorable conditions, we will eventually attain enlightenment. So helping others is fundamental on the path to Buddhahood. This very important chapter on patience is the foundation for the 8th chapter, which shows how we can benefit others through understanding the qualities of altruism and the disadvantages of egotism. In general, it is the very notion of enemies that is the main obstacle to bodhicitta. If we can transform an enemy into someone for whom we feel respect and gratitude, then our practice will naturally progress, like water following a channel cut in the earth. To be patient, Sola says, means not to get angry with those who harm us, instead to have compassion for them. That is not to say we should let them do what they like. We Tibetans, for example, have undergone great difficulties at the hand of others. But if we get angry with them, we can only be the losers. This is why we are practicing patience. But we are not going to let injustice and oppression go unnoticed. So again, coming back to this discussion of the doormat, being patient never ever means that we should act unintelligently. The thing about patience is when we have patience, we are far more capable of acting intelligently, being effective. And so we're not talking about letting go of injustice or oppression or any of that kind. And that His Holiness has to explain every time. Every time he talks about bodhicitta, there's always somebody who says, but should we be a doormat? And no, we're not talking about becoming doormats, but we are talking about being intelligent and being able to function. And that's where we need to understand what really is it that's the cause of suffering. And it's not the enemy out there that's the cause of suffering. It's our impatience, our anger, our particular vulnerable ego. And that's where we should understand where the cause lies. And again, the ego is not some whipping boy, or we're not bad because we have ego, but ego is simply just a condition of confusion. So the ego is something that doesn't have any inherent reality and something that we can work with. It only exists as long as we feed this delusion. And that's where the practice of patience is essential for us to actually begin to dismantle this rigid perception of ourselves and the rigid perception of others. And of course, also what's very much an important point here is this is exactly what the condition of enlightenment intends. The condition of enlightenment is never one of being righteous. The Buddha is never one who's for or against some people, you know. It's not as if the Buddha is for Buddhists and against people who are not Buddhists. The Buddha is for all sentient beings. And so that's where the Buddha's care is really embraces all sentient beings without any discrimination. And this is the enlightened condition. And we needn't externalize the Buddha as some authority. We can see this as being true to what we truly contain ourselves, what is truly our potential. So, okay. If praise is so destructive, should we give it? I do it a lot. Yeah, we should. Of course, we're going to make others happy. So that's a really good thing to do. So yes, no, definitely we should like this Indian person once said to a friend of mine, you should never be a miser with your kind words. And of course, when we make, again, coming to the last argument Shantideva makes, if we're making others happy, then we're pleasing the Buddhas. Should we be more critical of people so they can practice patience? No, don't worry, that's already happening. That's being taken care of. And we should be concerned about our own practice of patience. Flattery and criticism go down the same pipe. Okay, if you say so. Do you think even our teachers very kindly test our patience deliberately, though, to help us? If there's a strong connection between a student and a teacher, then yes, because the teacher sees the potential of the student. And that's where when there's close student-teacher relationship, then the teacher definitely will, you could say, work with the student in that degree, bring out, you could say, the potential for ego, so it surfaces, and then from there, it's much easier So what about praising others? Is this a good idea? Definitely, we should do that. That makes them happy. This chapter is so profound and reasonable and helpful. Wow. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was saying, this chapter is amazing. I'm recommending it to everybody. If we praise people's nastiness, aren't we propagating evil? Well, we're not talking about becoming unintelligent through practicing patience. So of course we don't encourage nastiness. That's not going to help anybody. How do we distinguish between condoning the destructive behaviors of others with a view to developing our own patience and helping their victims from suffering at their uncompassionate hands? We simply do our best. The thing is, we should do with our body and our speech and our mind, we should do our very best to act for others. What we need to do, and this again coming back to the core issue here, we should eliminate the anger in our heart. We're never going to help anybody. We won't be able to distinguish anything. We won't be able to help anybody as long as there's annoyance, irritation, anger in our heart. But as far as our actions goes, yes, then we need to act intelligently. But our intelligence will be hampered and flawed and limited as long as there's anger in our heart. So that's where the practice of patience is not about how we behave. It's not about our actions. It's about our it's about what's happening in our heart. Shantideva, I bow with deep gratitude. That is the teaching I need today. Wow, how amazing and fortunate to be here with the blessing and protection of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Thank you for this great opportunity. Thank you to the Dalai Lama. On the one hand, you say praise makes people happy, but on the other, you say praise is a hollow cause of ego. I don't understand. Very good question. Okay, this is it. We want to make others happy, but when we get praised, we should be aware how this causes our ego. We only have one job, and that's our ego. The ego of others, we can inspire them to engage in the path if we ourselves get over our egos. We can't bully or cajole others into being one way or another. And that's where the only ego that we actually need to address in this universe, luckily, that's where in a way it's our own. But when we do that, then spontaneously we're able to benefit others. Does that make sense? Did you have a question?
When it rises, what are you doing at that moment? Are you observing? Can you just explain that?
Very good question. What to do when we feel anger come on? And that is where Shantideva, and His Holiness didn't actually mention it. It's a very famous, there's a very famous line from Shantideva. I should find it. But he says, remain like a piece of wood. Don't move. When the anger comes up, remain like a piece of wood. But I remember Tukapel Wangel, who was teaching this. He said, when Shantideva says like a piece of wood, he says it's a bit like when you have a tree in the wind. It moves slightly, but it doesn't fall over. So a solid tree that's standing in the ground, when the wind blows, it doesn't move, but yet there's a flexibility. So when we feel anger come on, we don't give into it. But of course, we're still there. We don't become like a board and stiff or anything, but we don't give in to the anger. We know that this is the real enemy. The enemy is not the other person. The real enemy is the anger that's coming up. And you wait for it to pass. You wait for it to calm down, and above all, to be aware that this is the real issue. It's not the person out there. It's our anger. So did that make sense with regards to the praise? Yeah, we praise others to make them happy, and we're just happy that they're happy. Now, of course, if we're somebody's teacher, if we're a guru and so on, then it's different. But presently, most of us here presumably are just practitioners on the path. And even the teacher, if the teacher might scold a student or whatever, they do so, if it's a real teacher, they do so with deep love, deep caring. So there's never ever a time when where we should not have deep patience and profound love for sentient beings. Praise. We should praise good actions, not just the person, isn't it right? Yeah, I guess so. But also, you know, whatever really makes this other person feel good. If it's, you know, if it's called for. I mean, we would know ourselves. But the main point really is that it's about us and our vanity. That's where the Shantideva is onto our addiction to receiving praise. That's the main point here. And it stands in juxtaposition to our, you could say, adverse reaction to criticism, right? This chapter is so interesting and provocative. And I take great joy in it because I know so well where my limitations lie. So there's a sort of, it comes with a little bit of a, you can say almost like a sort of there's almost like it's almost funny, you know, how our self is such a big deal, and yet it's so obvious how this self-centering is what brings us down. So the sort of the brilliance of Shantideva's exposition is just such a delight and so hits home. So we don't care much for others' ego, but rather work with our anger, irritation, with aspiration, all of our liberation. Yes, yes. I mean, we do care for others' egos. We do care for others' happiness, but we're not, of course, into building anybody's ego. But at the same time, we actually don't know. That's the thing. We shouldn't be out there pretending to be a righteous judge of other people's egos. We should really just serve sentient beings on a very simple, on a very folksy, ordinary level. Just wish them to be happy and be happy when others are happy. So the real work, it is about our ego. That's what Shantideva is onto. If our teachers and Sangha are dismissive of us, unsupportive, and push us away, is this an opportunity to practice laying like a log being with the constant awful feelings that arise, or should we just leave? Well, we should recognize that it has so much to do with, again, us and our ego. Possibly there is no teachers or Sangha that are dismissive. Possibly there is no such a thing as an unsupported beings out there. What in fact we have, and that's Shantideva's point, is a lot of support in, not just in in Sangha and people that we within a spiritual context perceive as unsupportive, but also in the ordinary unsupported persons in our lives. The whole point is to actually see them as blessings. And the thing is, this also works magic, because once we begin to work this magic, we begin to actually, our paranoia and projections begin to fall away, and we begin to actually see goodness where we didn't perceive that before. It's the motives behind giving the praise. Exactly, and that's Shantideva's point. It's exactly that. And that's again where we are sometimes prone to say, oh yeah, but we like praise because it's the motivation behind. That's that we're giving them joy. But then Shantideva says, well, if that's the case, then we should be happy anytime that they're happy, right? And not, for example, when they praise our enemies or whatever, you know, align themselves with the people that we don't like. Beneath anger is always deep sadness. Exactly. And that's where we need to really have compassion for the whole situation of samsara and understand how much sadness is taking place. And for that reason, this is really what drives our entire path, is this wish to alleviate the suffering that takes place in samsara universally. So next chapter will be endeavor. That's right. Yes. Kindness. Kindness is so important. So praise with good heart. Yes. Yes. Okay. We'll conclude here. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realm. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. And just before we conclude, what we mean with bodhicitta is this condition of awakening that's basic to us. So all that we're doing with the path of enlightenment, is cultivating a condition of awakening that stands in opposition to our ignorance or our dullness, our mindlessness, unconsciousness. And so all the Buddha is really wishing for us is to be awake, to be aware. And that's what we mean with bodhicitta. And this awake quality has these 2 qualities of what we call wisdom, of being fully awake, and also compassion, caring for others, having this selfless condition of just the warm heart. So that's the bodhicitta, precious and sublime, that we're aspiring may come into, that it may become manifest, and once it manifests, that it doesn't weaken, but keeps flourishing.